our members, more than 50 used Health Network services last year. We have with us today Katie Hannibal. Where's Katie? She's in the back. She is the Director of Marketing for Health Network, and Paul Coomer is up here. He is the Vice President of Health Network. We thank Health Network for providing us the speakers, and we are thrilled to have them as a partner for this lecture series that we bring free of charge to the Boca Grande community. If you would like more information on the clinic, the foundation, or Health Network, we are all available afterwards at a reception that is provided by our hostesses. So just let me give a quick thank you to them. We have June Wright. Are the ladies in here, by the way, our hostesses? They're probably hiding in the back. So June Wright, Nancy Ireland, Angela Steffen, Angie Humbarger, Florida Field, and I think I got you all. Thank you so much for baking cookies and making tea. And as soon as the lecture's over, please join us in the Women's Club room. I would now like to hand the microphone over to our medical director, Dr. Michael Steffen, who will introduce today's speaker. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mary Ann. Before I introduce Dr. Chris Toole, I just had several stories that I would like to share with you why this topic is so important, at least from my perspective. And it was actually very easy. I just thought of my last week at the clinic and several times that I had conversation with patients. I promise I'm not going to violate any kind of HIPAA policies, but if you recognize yourself, thank you for the stories. I had two patients last week that are taking a medication called Wellbutrin. And Wellbutrin is an antidepressant. But both of them were having about 2 or 3 alcoholic beverages a day, which, again, that's, not, we'll hear the definition, that's not much alcohol, but no physician had ever told them that that's probably not a good combination with the drug Wellbutrin. It may actually make you more likely to have a seizure. And they were very, very surprised when I said, you really ought to probably think about cutting down on your dose of alcohol. And a couple of other stories, a lot of people on Boca Grande are on warfarin, and we spend a lot of our time adjusting warfarin, and a lot of time it has to do with either increasing the amount of alcohol consumption or decreasing the amount of alcohol consumption that can kind of throw off the drug that we're doing. A great story that I had, last week, I saw a patient who had had 2 ablations for atrial fibrillation, and they were not successful. And his cardiologist, electrophysiologist, nobody had said anything to him about stopping alcohol. And he was having about 5 glasses a day of his beverage of choice. And I was so happy when I saw him because he had stopped. He had stopped completely. And he said, Dr. Steffen, he said, I think I'm out of atrial fibrillation. And so, I would much rather do the simple things instead of having invasive procedures like ablations. I had somebody with high blood pressure, and I think the blood pressure wasn't controlled and that they needed to adjust their medication. And I kind of gave them an option. I said, we could either go down on the 3 alcoholic beverages that you're drinking a day, or I can add more medication. And actually it was interesting, we've added more medication. So I had somebody newly diagnosed with dementia on medications for Alzheimer's. And they didn't realize that both alcohol is not good for dementia, and it's not good to interact with the medications. I have multiple conversations about being overweight. Doc, how can I lose weight? And I'm sure you'll mention in your talk today some of the calories that go in alcohol, and I have this conversation over and over again. And so a lot of times I just get kind of the looks back like, Dr. Steffen, you're crazy. I'm never going to change this. So what did I do? I invited Dr. Toole to come lecture today. So, so turning to that, I'd like to introduce Dr. Toole. Dr. Chris Toole is Coordinator of Addiction Services at Linder Center for Hope in Cincinnati. He received his doctorate in clinical counseling at the University of Cincinnati. He is both a licensed professional clinical counselor and a licensed independent chemical dependency counselor, and he's been doing this for 29 years. So please give a big Boca Grande welcome to Dr. Chris Toole. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here. What a great, charming community this is. You know, in Cincinnati right now, we have 10-degree weather, and so coming down here has just been very enjoyable. And, you know, I was just telling my wife I had to leave, you know, to go to work, you know, and fly down here and do this presentation. I also know, too, that I guess last week Elvis performed here. So this is a tough act for me to follow Elvis here. Well, I'd like to thank the Health Network Foundation, the Boca Grande Health Clinic Foundation, as well as Northern Trust for providing this series and being able to allow me to come down here and talk about a very important topic. You know, but whenever I give a presentation, I always think about the two qualities of a good presenter. Number one is that they have a good memory, and number two, oh well, that will come to me later anyway. As you see, I have a lot of letters behind my name. In Ohio, we believe that you need more letters after your name than in front of your name, so I think that kind of speaks for itself. I've been doing this work for a long time, 29 years, looking at the relationship of mental health issues as well as substance issues. And the research is very clear that we have to treat it very integratively. You know, years ago, we used to treat it very sequential. You know, if anyone had a drug and alcohol problem, they would go to their drug and alcohol clinic and get treatment, detox, whatever that might be, but then my mental health issues of depression and anxiety would not get addressed. 30 years of research now says we need to treat this very integratively. And as I'll talk in a little bit, there is this relationship that we need to be aware of. So going forward here. I work at the Lindner Center of Hope, which is just north of Cincinnati. It is a private mental health hospital that provides inpatient, outpatient services, as well as residential care. So that's where I work. What is our focus for today in this next hour or so? What did we hope to accomplish? Really a better understanding of the basic principles related to what is non-problematic and problematic alcohol use. Understanding the key issues associated with the 3 C's when it comes to problematic use and what that is. What are some things that you can be aware of? Learn more about the CAGE alcohol screening test, which I'll go over. It's a very simple 4 questions that you could ask yourself or ask a family member to find out how much of a problem this might be, as well as look at the issues related to one's reliance on alcohol. Maybe what is perhaps driving that in some ways. Many times we have to ask these hard questions of ourselves or of our own family members, and it's a very difficult topic. It's a very difficult subject to look at. What are the questions that I need to ask, especially that loved one or that family member, to be aware of so that I can obtain the right assistance for my loved one? Maybe there's some fear maybe in asking those questions or fearful of the answer that I might get, especially when it comes to alcohol. So the question is, the questions might be, I ask, and how I ask these questions might determine the answer that I may receive. And let me demonstrate that for you. Okay, pick 3 numbers between 1 and 10. You can just shout them out. Anyone? 7, 3, 4. Out of 7, 3, and 4, pick 2 numbers. 7, 3, or 4. I heard 3 and 4. 3 and 4. So we have 7 left over, correct? And there's 4 suits in a deck of cards. Hearts, spades, diamonds, and clubs. Pick 2 suits, anyone. Hearts and spades. Out of hearts and spades, pick 1. Spades, okay. So we have hearts left over, and we had 7 left over. There's our numbers up there. There's our suits, and we put the 2 together, and we get what? 7 of hearts. We get the 7 of hearts. Now, sometimes the questions I ask can lead to the answers that I'm looking for. And if I'm looking for certain answers, I may not ask the exact questions or ask questions that I'm looking for that particular answer. In this case, I asked questions because I knew what the answer I was looking for. So I worded my questions in a way that I got the answer that I wanted. So sometimes when it comes to something very difficult, we have to ask those very hard questions. Even though it may feel uncomfortable, it may feel fearful in some ways, and I have to be aware of what is the impact that maybe this topic is having on me as a family member, as well as my loved one. What do you think about when you see this image? You think of love and beauty and relaxation. What was that? Somebody? Cialis. That's a very honest response. Very good, yes. But you know, they don't look like they're at that Cialis point yet, does it? But basically, a very tranquil, peaceful scene. Well, this was Photoshopped because the original picture was this. Now, how does this change our perception of this scene now with alcohol a part of that? And you know, we all have those memories, those sensations, those thoughts associated with good times as well as with alcohol, don't we? What about this picture? The blue sky, the water, the peacefulness, that serenity, relaxing. But the original picture was this. Pretty much in the forefront, don't you say? How many times do we associate good times, good memories, good celebrations with alcohol? What about these images here? We use it for celebrations and weddings. We use it for various religious ceremonies. Here's Kate, christening a boat. We use it in a lot of different ways, don't we? So what is that spectrum of alcohol? What is that aspect that we need to be aware of when it may possibly move into an area that becomes problematic for us? It is a wide spectrum. From some people, for example, some people do not drink. 25% of those over the age of 18 report a lifetime of abstinence in alcohol. Is that surprising? 1 out of 4 people report a lifetime of abstinence. Are they having fun? Well, see, once again, yeah, we've associated that fun, vacation, holidays, birthdays, weddings are all connected to it, to alcohol. And we've made those connections within our neural pathways in our brain. 30% of the population has not consumed alcohol in the past year. Where are they? Some people drink, and it is not problematic. 60% of those over the age of 18 report a use of alcohol that is controlled and safe. The majority of people who use alcohol use it very responsibly. It does not become out of control. It doesn't become compulsive. It doesn't interfere with their relationships or their family. But there is a percentage of people that it does. And that's what we're kind of focusing and moving towards. Some people drink, and it is problematic. It's reached a point that it's impacting their family and friends, impacting relationships. Many things that they enjoy in their life, it may start to have an impact. So if you think of that spectrum of alcohol use, down here we have people who don't use at all. And then we move into a large portion of people who drink where it's not problematic. But then we move into people who maybe misuse alcohol. Maybe I drink more than I should. I get a hangover. I have some headache the next day. I can't really function well the next day after some drinking. Maybe my use has moved into abuse, which has a definition that I put myself at risk. I maybe get behind the wheel when I drink. I put myself or other people at risk. And that could happen to any of us. Any of us could maybe only drink a few times a year, but that one time I drink, I get behind the wheel and something happens. That's alcohol abuse right there. And then dependence, where now I have a physiological aspect that's impacting my use of alcohol. And we'll talk more about that. So here's a better kind of picture of that spectrum. Some people don't use it all. Some people use where it's not problematic in their life. There's misuse of it, abuse, and dependence. Now, a person can make this transition into these different areas depending on maybe what's happening in one's life, maybe what stressors are happening. Maybe early on in life, I realized that, when I had that drink, it kind of just made me feel better, and all that stuff I was thinking about kind of floated away. It becomes maybe a way that I cope or a way that I deal with things. Maybe as more issues come up, maybe my health deteriorates, maybe I experience grief or loss of someone close to me, this becomes more of a reason to try to escape or cope. And you can kind of see very subtly how something that I used that was very harmless maybe in the beginning of having a glass of wine with dinner to celebrations that can move into something that is very subtle and starts taking control. It is that unraveling. I don't know if many people, I don't knit or any of that, but I'm sure if you are knitting or doing yarn, that if you pull that apart, you can see how that material starts to unravel. It's very easily, how holes can be created. Maybe my use of alcohol for most of my life has been associated with celebrations and holidays and joyous occasions, weddings, vacations, but maybe in a subtle way, ever so slightly, beginning to unravel. We experience changes in our bodies throughout our whole lifetime. As we age, our bodies contain less water, for example. Well, when we have less water in our body, and Dr. Stephan can vouch to this, that when we drink alcohol, that level of alcohol is greater because we have less water to absorb the alcohol. As we age, we find ourselves perhaps taking more medications. And the interaction between alcohol and medications sometimes can be not very healthy. If a person is taking antidepressants or anti-anxiety medicine, sometimes with alcohol it can create that more sedative feeling. So that's a concern. As we age, we experience more health issues, maybe hip or knee replacement, and how alcohol we know affects the frontal cortex here. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But one area of the frontal cortex is our ability to keep our balance, to be able to coordinate. That's why people stagger when they drink. And if I've had some physical issues, I've had that hip replacement or knee replacement, I'm putting myself at risk when I drink the alcohol. So there is that no use, normal use, misuse, abuse, and dependence. So let's just briefly talk about abuse and dependence and what that is. Sometimes we hear these words and we're not really clear on what it means. Let's kind of break that down a little bit. Substance abuse criteria. Recurrent use resulting in failure to fulfill major roles or obligations of work, school, or home. Recurrent use in situations in which it is physically hazardous. For example, driving a car, going rock climbing. Believe it or not, people do that when they are drinking. Recurrent substance-related legal problems, DUI, maybe domestic issues at home. And then continued use despite having persistent or reoccurrent social or interpersonal problems caused or exacerbated by the effects of the substance. Basically, that number 4 says, I continue to do it despite these negative consequences in my life. So let's compare this to dependence. Well, by the way, when we look at abuse, to meet that criteria, we just need one of those 4. One of the 4 to meet that criteria. Substance dependence criteria. There's tolerance. Tolerance means, when you maybe first had that drink in high school or junior high, that first beer or whatever, you felt that effect. But then as you maybe move through adulthood, that one beer doesn't have that effect anymore. I have to drink more, or maybe something with higher alcohol content. You know, beer is about 2 to 6% alcohol. Wine is a little bit more like anywhere from 8 to 20%. And then liquor, we're looking at 40 to 50%, kind of in those range. More alcohol. So my tolerance kind of stops at a certain point, and I need to drink more to get that same effect. Withdrawal. When I stop using, my body has a physiological response. Maybe I get a headache, I feel agitated. Some people feel the shakes in the morning. Delirium tremens, the DTs, is that really very serious type of withdrawal. Sometimes it might even need medical assistance due to heart rate, due to blood pressure issues. The substance is often taken in larger amounts over a longer period of time than intended. Persistent desire, I try to stop, I try to cut down, but I've been unsuccessful. A great amount of time is spent in activities obtaining the substance, using the substance, and recovering from its effects. Important activities are given up. Things that I used to do, things I used to enjoy. You know, going to the theater, or, you know, I just don't go out, you know, get out and play tennis or golf like I used to. And then the substance use continues despite problems in my life. I still continue to do it, even though it's causing problems in many aspects of my life. And to meet this criteria, I just need 3 of the 7. So that's substance dependence. This is my daughter. She is a graduate student at Gallaudet University in Washington, D.C. She's getting her master's in deaf studies, and I asked her, could you do the sign language for, let's see, can I get this work? Yeah. That's the sign language for addiction. If you notice, it's a hook, pulling the mouth, becoming addicted to it. How many people here are left-handed? Can you show your hands? Okay. Being left-handed is about 10% of the population. About 10% of the population have some form of an addiction. Now, I'm not saying those who raise your hand right now are those who have an addiction, but that's how common it is. When we look at the Latin word for addiction, it is a term or a word that's called adicere, which means to be a slave to. In order to have a better understanding of the chemical dependency or addiction, we need to be better aware of the 3 C's. Is there a loss of control? Is there compulsion? I can't stop doing the behavior. Do I continue to use the substance despite the negative consequences that it has in my life? So if it has these 3 C's, that's safe to say that we're looking at something that is in that realm of addiction. Loss of control, compulsion, and the continued use despite the negative consequences. What can cause a reliance on alcohol? Well, here's an acronym that I came up with that I think shows this relationship. CUBIS. Chemical imbalance. Now, if we all had low levels of a chemical neurotransmitter in our brain called serotonin, we would all feel depressed. It would impact our mood. For whatever reason, some people, it runs in their family where I have low levels of that, and so therefore depression or anxiety may run in my family. But maybe that's not been identified in my family. Maybe there's issues of depression and anxiety that happen, and perhaps I use alcohol as a way to try to regulate that. Maybe when I feel down, I drink to maybe kind of bring me up. Or when I feel anxious, maybe I drink to help me settle myself down. It's a false way of trying to gain that homeostasis or that balance within myself that is maybe caused by some chemical imbalance that is running in my family. Some people have unresolved issues, loss, grief, things that are very difficult to deal with, things I maybe don't want to think about, feelings I don't want to feel. So as a way, maybe I try to just keep those thoughts and feelings down by putting the lid of alcohol on top of them. So I don't have to feel those things. I don't have to think about those things. You know, it might be anything from, you know, the quality of my life. Maybe it's things that I regret. Maybe there's been trauma in my history. Maybe there's been loss. All these things bring up feelings and thoughts that are uncomfortable. And I have found maybe just by accident that when I drink, it helps to take those away. But it becomes a very unhealthy way of trying to manage those unresolved issues. Some people have a belief, but that belief is distorted. Now, we are all born with a belief system, and that belief system changes throughout our life. It's the messages we get from other people, you know, how we see the world, how we see ourselves, what we value, what's important to us. But maybe some of those things in that belief system are not true. Maybe I have a belief that the only way I can be outgoing or social is when I drink. That's a distorted belief. That's not true. That's just a belief that I believe to be true. You know, I used to play in a band years ago in Cincinnati, and I would have bandmates who would think that they played better when they had, you know, a couple drinks in them. Well, no, they didn't. They thought they did. You know, that's the thing. But so sometimes I might use alcohol as a way to kind of, you know, make me feel like I'm more confident or more social. But that's a distorted belief. That's not necessarily true. The I, inability to cope. Now, I'm sure most of us can probably think in our lifetime that we've had someone like a best friend. A best friend who's always been there for you, 24/7. A best friend is someone that you can always count on. A best friend is there during good times and in bad. So, you know, hopefully we all have someone like that in our life. Well, for some people who have issues around alcohol, that's the same relationship they have. The alcohol is there for me 24/7. It's there during good times and in bad. And it's there when I couldn't count on anyone else. I could count on that drink or that bottle. You know, Elton John sings in one of his songs, I think it's Saturday Night's All Right for Fighting. He has a verse that says, my best friend floats at the bottom of the glass. What's really interesting is that alcohol affects the area of the brain, the same area of the brain where we develop meaningful relationships. So to give up alcohol is like giving up a best friend. You know, when we see folks in treatment who are, you know, getting healthy, many times they will grieve the loss of the alcohol. They'll write songs about it. They'll write poems about their alcohol. They'll have tears about having to give up something that was very important to them that they believe helped them get through very tough times in their life. And then finally, the stimulus-response relationship. I'm going to spend a little bit more time on this. Some of you might remember years ago in psychology, there was Pavlov and his dogs. Pavlov was a physiologist, and he studied how dogs learn. And one of the things that he did was when you present food to a dog will salivate. That's called an unconditioned response. That pretty much happens to us. You know, we went out for dinner last night with Dr. Stefan and his wife, and when they bring out that plate, you know, you can feel yourself salivating. You know, that shrimp is just looking so good. So that's an unconditioned response. What Pavlov did was he would ring a bell and then present the food. Ring the bell, present the food, and did that over and over until eventually the bell made the dogs salivate. Bells normally don't do that, right? But we have lots of bells. We have lots of triggers and cues in our life that has been associated with alcohol. Good cues like celebrations and parties and holidays. And so maybe that drives our use of alcohol because we have those triggers. Now what this slide here shows some very important information about what we know about the addictive brain. Now once again, I'm talking about a small percentage, 6 to 10% of the population who have use of alcohol where it's compulsive, out of control, and they continue to do it despite the negative consequences, those 3 C's.